Hey everyone, welcome back to The Foundry by Forge College. Okay, I know you literally just hit submit on that reflective essay for the last module. So take a deep breath, unclench your jaw, and let's switch gears a bit. Today we're diving into a super fascinating historical explainer, the motivations and social roots of the cypherpunk movement. This is kind of the origin story for, well, everything we talk about in Web3. All right, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with Section 1, this cypherpunk era begins, then move into public squares versus private houses. Section 3 covers cryptography as civic infrastructure, followed by solving real social risks. Then we'll check out the mailing list laboratory, and finally wrap up with the cypherpunk legacy. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The cypherpunk era begins, focusing on the intellectual soil. We're picking up exactly where your last course, Why Blockchain, Philosophy, Trust, and Practical Value, left off. So, before we can really grasp the code powering today's decentralized networks, we kind of have to look at the soil where those seeds were planted. Like, what made these early activists tick? Why were they so obsessed with privacy? If we can understand their social roots and how they organized, it honestly acts like a master decoder ring for making sense of all their wild manifestos and the brilliant code they eventually wrote. Moving to Section 2, public squares versus private houses. Let's set up a quick mental model to visualize this. To really get what the cypherpunks were going for, imagine society as a city that is strictly divided into two zones, the public square and private houses. Out in the public square, that's where visible civic action happens, right? Parades, speeches, buying your morning coffee. But because it's public, it naturally attracts surveillance and record keeping. On the flip side, you've got private houses. This is where we retreat, where we plan, where we can just be ourselves without someone looking over our shoulder. The cypherpunks realized that if activists are going to organize safely, they absolutely need the autonomy of private houses. They needed to build those safe spaces, but digitally. But here's the catch, and it's a trap so many engineers fall into. If your digital private house is too complicated to get into, it's basically useless. Imagine installing a massive 50-pound iron lock on your front door. Sure, no one's breaking in, but if it's too heavy for you to open in an emergency, you're going to end up just skipping the house entirely and risking staying out in the public square because it's easier. Good security absolutely has to be usable. Section 3, cryptography as civic infrastructure. So, how do we actually build those highly secure but usable digital spaces? Well, first, we need to untangle two concepts that get mixed up all the time: privacy and anonymity. Privacy is really just about controlling who sees your info. Think of it like pulling your curtains closed so the neighbors can't watch you eat dinner. Anonymity, though, that's about making sure an action can never be linked back to you at all. It's like walking through a crowded room in an absolutely flawless disguise. The movement talked a lot about privacy, but in their code, they were laser-focused on anonymity to prevent anyone from being coerced. And here is the absolute genius of the cypherpunk movement. They completely rebranded cryptography. Before them, crypto was this arcane, highly classified military math used by spies and governments. They dragged it out into the light and reframed it as everyday civil liberties tech. They were literally handing out digital curtains and deadbolts for the internet, arguing that putting this tech in the hands of regular people gives power right back to the citizens. Section 4. Solving real social risks. Let's look at how they applied these tools pragmatically. These folks weren't just coding in a vacuum. They developed a super practical grammar for their activism. They'd spot a societal harm, pick the right cryptographic countermeasure, and target a specific outcome. For instance, if the threat is state surveillance, boom, use end-to-end encryption to enable private dissent. Worried about corporations hoarding your data? Apply client-side encryption so you keep control. It was a brilliantly straightforward formula. Identify the problem, apply the math, and distribute the fix. But, and this is a pretty massive but, we always say in our Forge College courses that tech does not magically solve human problems on its own. Cryptography is absolutely necessary, but it's not sufficient for real social change. You could have the most unbreakable encryption on Earth, but if your local laws make using it illegal, or if it's just too confusing for your community to adopt, that social change just isn't going to happen. You need the support of community just as much as the code. Section 5. The mailing list laboratory. Let's step into the virtual room where this community actually organized. You've got to picture this mailing list as a totally chaotic, completely brilliant, and honestly, sometimes ruthless laboratory. Someone would drop a rough sketch of a new tool into the group, and instantly the community would pounce on it. They'd peer review it for bugs, argue endlessly over the legal risks, and debate its moral implications. Only after it survived that absolute gauntlet would they modify it and push out the instructions. What really made this lab work were the social rules they built in. They archived everything, so a newcomer could jump in, search the history, and instantly see how a tool was built, which massively lowered the barrier to entry. Plus, they had one golden rule: show us the code. Theories were cute, but reproducible, working code was king. By battle testing everything in real-world constraints, they moved these concepts out of the academic clouds and into reality, fast. Finally, Section 6, the Cypherpunk legacy. What did this crew of privacy-obsessed coders actually leave behind for the rest of us? Well, they left behind a fascinating tension. On one side, they demanded total openness, open source code, public debates, holding each other accountable. But on the flip side, they required intense secrecy, operational security and anonymity to protect vulnerable activists. They justified this secrecy not because they wanted to hide bad behavior, but because they saw it as the only valid defense for political liberty against massive top-down power. The result was this brilliant compromise. They prioritized user control, deployable tools, and minimal trust over having to rely on the goodwill of massive centralized institutions. They basically said, we shouldn't have to ask a government or a corporation for permission to have a private conversation. They built decentralized tools that put the power squarely back in the individual's hands, and honestly, that philosophy is the absolute bedrock of the distributed systems we all use today. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this. When you look at our modern digital landscape, which of the tools you use every day are actually expanding your private house? And which ones are just quietly dragging you back into the surveilled public square? Keep that in the back of your mind as you head over to forge.college to jump into our next lesson, Key Figures and Influential Writings, or to explore any of our other Web3 tracks. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.